My name is Sophia, and I'm 35 years old. I was born into a family that believed appearances were everything, where luxury cars in the driveway and designer handbags on your arm were the only proof of success. My earliest memories are filled with the scent of perfume at family dinners and the subtle sting of condescension whenever I showed up in clothes my mom had carefully mended to last just a bit longer. While my cousins posed for photos in new outfits, every holiday I learned to make one good dress look fresh again and again with a borrowed scarf or a hand me down necklace. It didn't matter how well I did in school or how hard I worked part time jobs to help my mom keep the lights on. In their eyes, I was always the poor relative, someone to be pitied or worse, ignored. My mother, a single parent who worked double shifts, cleaning houses and waitressing, never complained about our modest two-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood most of my family would never set foot in. She taught me the value of every dollar we managed to save and the importance of standing tall, even when the world tried to bend you into something else. But those lessons felt like armor I had to wear every time we entered the gilded halls of our family gatherings. My uncle Robert the Patriarch never missed a chance to offer backhanded advice about how I might do better, if only you'd be more like your cousins. My cousin Emily, who loved to flaunt her new luxury bags at each event, never failed to shoot me a pitying glance that felt like a dagger through my confidence. Yet even in those moments, I refused to let their whispers define me. I watched them carefully, noting how they treated their wealth as a birthright, how they believed being born into privilege meant they were entitled to everything. They never saw how my mother's calloused hands shaped my determination, or how our small apartment felt like the center of the universe, to me, a place of quiet resilience and unwavering love. They couldn't understand that behind every practical outfit was a strategy, behind every sacrifice was a plan. They saw only what they wanted to see: someone small, someone beneath them, someone who would never measure up. And I let them believe that until the day I realized their perception of me was the perfect cover for what I was really building: a future that wouldn't depend on their approval at all. Growing up in the shadow of family members who measured worth in square footage and brand names, I learned early that appearances could be both armor and prison. While my cousins flaunted their new cars on their 16th birthdays, I was working nights at the corner diner, saving every tip for something I knew would matter more in the long run. My mother, who never once complained about working two jobs, taught me to see beyond the glossy surface my family worshipped. She showed me how every dollar, if given enough respect, could become a seed for something bigger. She taught me that real security wasn't found in the gleaming marble floors of my uncle's mansion. It was built in quiet, deliberate choices no one else had the patience to make. In high school, while my classmates posted photos of shopping sprees and new gadgets, I was reading books on personal finance, learning about compound interest and long-term investing. My friends laughed when I said I wanted to buy real estate one day, but I saw what they couldn't: that security wasn't in a label, but in ownership. The day I bought my first car, a 10-year-old Honda I paid for in cash, felt like a silent victory, a symbol that even if I was years behind the family's glossy facade, I was building something that was mine alone. In college, I studied finance at the State University, a full scholarship my family treated like a consolation prize, compared to the Ivy League schools my cousins attended. But that scholarship was my badge of honor, proof that discipline and grit meant more than any fancy diploma. I took on part-time jobs, managed my expenses down to the cent, and refused to let the family's disdain weigh me down. My weekends were spent reading property listings and running numbers, dreaming of the day I could turn a modest paycheck into a portfolio that would stand on its own. After graduation, I entered a job market battered by the financial crisis. My cousins with family money as their safety net moved seamlessly from college to cushy corporate jobs. I took what I could get: temporary positions, freelance gigs, anything to stay afloat. The constant hustle wasn't glamorous, but it taught me something invaluable: that adaptability is the truest kind of wealth. And slowly, piece by piece, I built my own ladder. When I was 30, I finally scraped together enough for a down payment on a small duplex, in a neighborhood no one in my family would have bothered to glance at. I lived in one unit, rented out the other, and poured every spare cent back into paying down the mortgage. My family mocked me at gatherings, calling my living situation practical, in the same tone they'd use to dismiss a cheap imitation. But I saw what they couldn't: a foundation. I wasn't just surviving, I was planting roots that would grow in the cracks of their shallow world. 2 years later, I refinanced and bought a triplex, then a 4-unit building. I watched as the rent payments covered my mortgage and built my equity, a quiet rebellion against the myth that success could only be measured by what you could show off. My portfolio grew in the shadows. No luxury vacations, no flashy cars, no social media bragging. My name never appeared in the family's gossip or in their endless reels of designer shopping hauls, and that was exactly how I wanted it. My mother passed away around the time I closed on my third property, and her absence left a void no amount of money could fill. But, in the long nights after her funeral, as I sat alone in my modest apartment, I realized she'd given me everything I needed to keep going: resilience, discipline, and the quiet confidence to know that true wealth isn't loud, it's steady and unshakable. As I expanded my investments, I formed an LLC, Anderson Legacy Properties, a name that would both honor and reclaim the family name that had so often been used to belittle me. My goal wasn't to show off or even to prove them wrong. It was to prove to myself that the path I'd chosen, slow, steady, and intentional, wasn't just valid. It was powerful. Today, I still drive that same Honda. I still live in a modest apartment. But behind the scenes, my investments span 3 states, quietly, growing quietly, thriving. My relatives are too busy showing off to notice what I've built, but that's fine by me. In the end, the only validation I've ever needed is the one I give myself. If you're watching this and see yourself in my story, let me know in the comments where you're from. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me keep sharing these journeys of quiet strength and real growth. Let's build something real together. By the time I reached 33, my quiet empire had grown beyond my wildest dreams. My modest lifestyle and the dusty Honda I still drove were all part of the camouflage and armor that allowed me to keep building in peace. But even the strongest armor can't protect you from betrayal when it comes from the inside. Emily, my younger cousin, was the last person I ever expected to cut me so deeply. We'd grown up sharing whispered dreams on the cracked front steps of our grandmother's house, swearing we'd always look out for each other, even as our lives took such different paths. She was the only family member who ever asked real questions about my investments, who seemed to admire the way I turned every penny into an opportunity. She said she was inspired, said she wanted to learn from me. I believed her. So when Emily asked to shadow me on a few property visits, just to see how it all works, she said I didn't hesitate. I shared everything: how I vetted properties, negotiated deals, navigated tricky tenants. She called me her mentor, and I let my guard down in a way I hadn't for anyone in my family. I wanted to believe she saw me, not just the quiet cousin living in the background of her glitzy life. I should have known better. One evening, Emily called, her voice soft with excitement. "I've got a lead on a new building, Soph. I want your opinion." She sent me the details, and my pulse quickened when I saw the address: Westbrook Towers. A gorgeous old building in a prime neighborhood, and exactly the kind of property I'd been eyeing for years. I'd told Emily about it months ago, how it was my dream acquisition if I could ever pull together the financing. When I arrived to check it out, Emily was already there, except she wasn't alone. She stood beside Uncle Robert, the family patriarch, who had spent years dismissing me as a financial lightweight. The two of them were deep in conversation, flipping through paperwork that looked suspiciously like my investment analysis. My analysis. My carefully guarded strategy, the one Emily had watched me put together brick by brick. The realization was a gut punch. She'd taken everything I'd shared with her in trust and handed it straight to him. My uncle looked up when he saw me, the smug triumph in his eyes, a silent declaration of war. "Oh, Sophia!" he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "I didn't expect you here. Emily's been telling me all about this opportunity. Seems like you were onto something smart. But of course, in this family, we like to keep things consolidated." Emily wouldn't meet my eyes. In that moment, I saw her for who she really was, not the wide-eyed cousin desperate for a seat at the table, but someone who had decided that survival in this family meant siding with those who had always looked down on me. My stomach churned with anger and disbelief. The girl who once borrowed my hand-me-downs and cried on my shoulder about how she never felt good enough had chosen to trade my trust for a seat at the table that had never welcomed me. I left that meeting reeling, but I didn't let them see me break. The hurt was deep, but so was my resolve. That night, as I sat in the glow of my computer screen, I realized I couldn't let this betrayal stand. I wouldn't let them steal the future I'd built in the shadows. I pored over every detail of Westbrook Towers, calling in every favor and tapping every resource I had. If they thought they could use my own plan against me, they hadn't learned a damn thing about who I really was. I secured financing in record time, leveraging my growing portfolio as collateral. My LLC Anderson Legacy Properties submitted an offer so airtight that not even Uncle Robert's connections could break it apart. I moved in silence, fueled not by the desire for revenge, but by something more powerful, the determination to show them that my worth wasn't theirs to define or dismiss. The day my offer was accepted was the day I stopped thinking of myself as the family's black sheep and started seeing myself as exactly what I'd become, a quiet storm no one had seen coming. When I signed the final paperwork, I didn't feel the triumph I'd imagined. What I felt was something colder and sharper, a steely promise to myself never again would I let anyone else hold the power to define my worth. Not Emily, not Uncle Robert, and definitely not the family that had spent decades telling me I wasn't enough. What do you think of Emily's betrayal and Sophia's next move? Drop a comment below, and let's talk about the power of boundaries, quiet strength, and what it takes to rise after a fall. The betrayal by Emily and Uncle Robert had stung deeply, but it also ignited something fierce and unyielding inside me. In the days following that confrontation at Westbrook Towers, I refused to let bitterness consume me. Instead, I channeled every ounce of my disappointment into action, turning that betrayal into the fuel I needed to rise even higher. I immersed myself in research, poring over every detail of Westbrook Towers' financial health tenant profiles and long-term potential. My goal wasn't simply to beat them to the deal, it was to ensure that once I had it, no one could ever take it from me again. I knew Uncle Robert would try to leverage his connections to undercut my offer or spread rumors to the seller. So I approached the deal with surgical precision, assembling a team of trusted professionals, a real estate attorney who'd spent 2 decades outmaneuvering sharks, just like my uncle, a property manager with a reputation for integrity and my own ironclad resolve. I didn't just offer to buy Westbrook Towers. I made it clear to the seller that my vision was about preservation and growth, not flipping it for a quick profit. They'd seen enough investors who treated properties like disposable assets, so they were more than willing to consider a buyer who wanted to be a real steward of their building's future. My offer wasn't the highest bid on paper, but it was the most compelling, and within weeks the deal was done. Westbrook Towers was mine. The day the final papers were signed, I didn't announce it to anyone in the family. I let the news sit in my heart like a quiet victory, a secret that belonged only to me. But beneath that calm, there was a growing sense of vindication, a certainty that I'd finally proven to myself that I was stronger than their dismissal and smarter than their schemes. The real test, though, wasn't in the purchase itself. It was in how I chose to wield that power. My name was nowhere on the leases or public documents. Everything ran through Anderson Legacy Properties. From the outside, it looked like any other real estate transaction. But to me, it was a declaration I wasn't just playing their game anymore, I was rewriting the rules. In the weeks leading up to the annual family conference, I worked quietly to finalize the management transition. My property manager handled every detail, ensuring that the tenants, including several of my own family members, would experience a seamless shift in operations. Maintenance schedules were refined, lease agreements reviewed, and new communication channels opened for tenant concerns. It was business as usual, except for one key detail: I was the new landlord they'd never see coming. Every evening, as I reviewed the paperwork and progress reports from my property manager, I felt a strange blend of pride and sadness. pride in the empire I'd built without compromising who I was, sadness that the people who should have been cheering me on were the very ones who'd tried to sabotage me. But I refused to let their small-mindedness drag me down to their level. My mother's voice echoed in my head on those nights, her steady wisdom reminding me that revenge could be a hollow pursuit if it was driven by anger alone. So I chose to treat my ownership of Westbrook Towers not as a weapon, but as a chance to show them a better way. My family's rent checks would no longer feed a faceless corporation, they'd contribute to a legacy built on resilience and quiet strength. And I would honor my mother's memory by ensuring that the tenants, whether family or strangers, were treated with respect and fairness. When the annual family conference finally arrived, I walked into that hotel ballroom not as the poor relation in a borrowed dress, but as the silent architect of my own future. The luxury cars lined up outside, the designer gowns and showy jewelry on full display. It was all so familiar, and yet so distant. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had my own empire built one decision at a time, $1 at a time. The irony was almost poetic. While they were busy chasing status and surface, I'd been quietly laying foundations that would outlast their fleeting displays of wealth. As I sipped my water and listened to them brag about their vacations and new investments, I felt no urge to correct their assumptions about me. Let them think what they would. It only made the truth that much more satisfying. Are you as fascinated by Sophia's quiet empire as I am? Drop a comment and let me know how you'd handle betrayal and success in your own life. Let's keep building our own legacies together. By the time the annual family conference rolled around, I was ready in a way I'd never been before. The grandeur of the hotel ballroom didn't intimidate me anymore. The glint of chandeliers and the low murmur of laughter were no longer symbols of my exclusion. They were just background noise to the quiet power I now held. I'd rehearsed every word I might say, every question they might throw at me, and every dismissive glance I knew was coming. As I stepped through those grand double doors, the air seemed to crackle around me, as if the room itself sensed that everything was about to change. My family was already in full performance mode, their conversations laced with humble brags and social climbing. Uncle Robert was holding court in a corner, weaving a tale about a new business deal that would supposedly put our family's name on the map, never mind that he was still paying rent to my company every month. My cousin Emily was laughing too loudly, her manicured fingers brushing the sleeve of an investor she hoped would forget how she'd once betrayed her own blood. The moment she saw me, her smile flickered like a candle in the wind, but she quickly recovered, calling out a saccharine greeting that didn't fool anyone. I moved through the room, each step a quiet act of defiance. They still saw me as the poor cousin in my plain black dress, but I didn't care anymore. Every mocking word they'd ever spoken was now just an echo in a room where I held the deed to the ground beneath their feet. When Uncle Robert finally noticed me, he beckoned me over, with the same patronizing smile he'd worn since I was a child. "Sophia," he drawled. "I hope you're not still stuck in that little apartment of yours. You know, one day you'll have to think bigger if you want to get ahead." His words, meant to belittle, only made me smile. "Thank you for the advice," I said lightly. "I've been thinking bigger than you can imagine." The family conference began in earnest when Uncle Robert clinked his glass and launched into his usual monologue about the importance of legacy and family honor. I watched him carefully, noting how every sentence was a performance, every pause a calculated move to keep the spotlight on himself. One by one, my cousins shared their updates: new promotions, new cars, new vacation homes. The applause was polite but hollow, each update a script in the family's endless play for approval. When it was finally my turn, the room fell into that uneasy silence I'd grown so familiar with. They expected the same old story, some small success, to politely applaud, before moving on to more exciting topics. I let the silence stretch just a beat longer than necessary before I spoke. "I've been investing," I began, simply, my voice steady. "Not in the way you might expect, but in a way that's building something real, something lasting." Uncle Robert chuckled, the sound grating against my resolve. "Sophia, you've always been such a cautious little thing," he said, a smirk on his lips. "When are you going to learn that real success means taking risks?" I didn't flinch. Funny you should mention that I said sliding the leather portfolio I'd brought with me onto the polished table, because I did take a risk. One that paid off in ways you probably can't imagine. Emily's eyes widened as I opened the portfolio, revealing the stack of documents inside. "What's that?" she asked, her voice an octave too high. "This," I said calmly, "is the ownership transfer for Westbrook Towers." For a moment, no one seemed to understand. Then, recognition dawned on their faces, a slow, creeping realization that the building they called home was no longer just an address. It was my victory. "You bought it." Uncle Robert's voice was a whisper, almost lost in the shocked hush of the room. "You bought the building we're living in." I nodded, letting the truth settle around them like dust in the light. "Yes," I said, "I bought it, and I own it outright. No partners, no family handouts. Just me and the determination you always said I lacked." The silence was a living thing, stretching out as they processed what this meant. Rent checks, lease agreements, the unspoken hierarchy of who held the real power in this family, it had all shifted in an instant. I didn't raise my voice or gloat. I didn't have to. The truth was louder than any performance they could put on. Have you ever been underestimated like Sophia? Drop a comment below and share your story. Let's build each other up. The weight of my announcement settled over the room, like a fog, chilling and dense, leaving no corner untouched. I could see the shock flickering across their carefully curated expressions. Uncle Robert's smirk dissolving into a slack-jawed confusion, Emily's manicured fingers twitching around her champagne glass. It was as if the entire narrative they'd built about me had cracked open, the truth seeping in like cold water. For a brief, satisfying moment, no one said a word. Then, as if on cue, the whispers started. Aunt Patricia leaned in toward her sister, her face pale under layers of makeup. My cousin Derek shot me a look that was equal parts disbelief and sudden respect. Even the servers gliding through the room with trays of hors d'oeuvres seemed to slow, caught in the gravity of this unspoken revelation. I didn't gloat or rush to fill the silence. I let it expand around us, a living testament to the power of quiet triumph. Uncle Robert recovered first, his voice forced into a brittle laugh. "Well, Sophia," he said too loudly, "this is impressive. But surely you're not planning to play landlord to your own family. That's a heavy burden for someone with no experience." His words were meant to needle me, to diminish what he couldn't control. But I met his gaze evenly, feeling the unshakable calm of someone who knows exactly who she is. "I'm not here to play at anything," I replied softly. "I'm here to build, just as I've always done." Emily's voice was next sharp, and a little too eager. "Sophia, you never told me you were serious about Westbrook Towers," she said, as if we were just friends catching up, not co-conspirators, in a betrayal that had nearly broken me. "I thought we were just exploring possibilities, not this." Her tone was light, but I could hear the panic in it, the realization that the cousin she'd written off was no longer someone to dismiss or toy with. I didn't bother responding to her directly. My eyes moved across the room, meeting the curious, uneasy stares of my other relatives, each one a witness to the quiet empire I'd built, while they'd been busy crafting illusions of grandeur. I stood smoothing the simple black dress I'd chosen for tonight, the same one they'd once called quaint with barely hidden scorn. "I know this is unexpected," I said, my voice calm and even, "but I'm not here to argue or justify my choices. I've treated this like any other business decision, carefully, strategically, and with a clear understanding of what it takes to build something real and lasting." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, firm and final. "From this point on, I expect the same respect you give to anyone else you do business with." The air shifted, then the faintest ripple of acknowledgement, passing from one face to the next. The performance of wealth had always been their shield, their stage. Now I had pulled back the velvet curtain and shown them what real power looked like. Not loud, not ostentatious, but quiet and absolute. Uncle Robert's face tightened, the veins in his neck standing out as he struggled to maintain his composure. "Of course," he said finally, his tone clipped. "We're all family here. No one wants to make this personal." I let a faint smile touch my lips. "Good," I said simply. "Because for me, this isn't personal. It's professional." I will continue to manage Westbrook Towers with the same care and fairness I've always given to my tenants, family or not. The clarity of that statement left no room for argument. For once, there were no dismissive laughs or backhanded comments, only the soft rustle of silk and the dull clink of glass as they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. As the night wound down, I found myself standing near the massive windows overlooking the city skyline. The ballroom behind me buzzed with forced conversation, but the view ahead was endless glittering lights that reminded me of every late night I'd spent building this life in the shadows. A hand touched my shoulder lightly. It was Emma, Uncle Robert's youngest daughter, and the only one who had always seen me as more than the family's poor cousin. "You know," she said softly, "I've never been more proud to be your cousin. They've never known how to see you, but tonight, you showed them." Her words landed like a balm over the lingering ache of betrayal. I turned to face her, and in her quiet smile, I saw the possibility of something new, of relationships that might finally be built on truth and mutual respect, not pretense. Behind me, the ballroom carried on, but I no longer felt like a guest in someone else's story. This was my narrative now, and for the first time, I was telling it on my own terms. In the quiet after the storm, I found myself back in my apartment, my sanctuary of simple comforts and unassuming peace. The echoes of that night still hummed in my ears, my family's stunned silence, their forced civility, the shift in power that no one could deny. And yet beneath the triumph, there was a tender ache I couldn't ignore. My empire had grown, my voice had finally been heard, but the cost of that victory was more than just business. It was the quiet realization that some ties, no matter how deeply rooted in blood, could be more fragile than I ever imagined. I thought of my mother, then her voice soft but unbreakable, teaching me that real wealth isn't in what you show the world, but in the quiet certainty of your own worth. That night, as I sat in the gentle lamplight of my apartment, I promised myself I would carry her wisdom forward, not as a weapon, but as a guiding star. I would continue to build, to invest in the things that mattered, but I would no longer measure my success by the approval of those who had never cared to understand the journey. As the days passed, some family members reached out with newfound respect, while others retreated into sullen distance. I didn't chase either. Instead, I focused on what was next, expanding my investments into affordable housing projects, supporting those who had never been invited to the table. For the first time, I felt like I was truly living for me, not to prove a point or secure a seat at a table that had always been too small. Looking out my window at the city skyline, I understood that this wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning, the start of a chapter I would write with deliberate care, free from the expectations of those who had once defined me. I was no longer the family's poor relation. I was Sophia, the architect of my own life, and my greatest wealth was knowing I'd done it all on my terms. What does true wealth mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories of quiet triumphs and hard-won wisdom.